The Galactic Concord had long believed it had perfected its understanding of life. Across thousands of worlds, biology had been categorized, ranked, and controlled with clinical precision. Safe worlds were cultivated for peace. Harsh worlds were avoided or sterilized. Any planet that exceeded tolerable thresholds of radiation, gravity, toxins, predators, or climate instability was labeled a death world and dismissed as unfit for intelligent life. For cycles beyond counting, that belief remained unchallenged. No civilized species originated from such places. That was the consensus, repeated in every council chamber and encoded into every interstellar classification system. Until Earth was discovered. Even then, Earth was not taken seriously. It was catalogued, scanned, and dismissed as an evolutionary accident. The records described crushing gravity compared to standard habitats, airborne pathogens that mutated unpredictably, oceans filled with territorial predators, land ecosystems where even plants could injure living beings, and weather systems capable of reshaping continents. The Concord assigned it a quarantine marker and moved on. But Earth did not remain quiet. On a remote observation station orbiting the outer rim, analysts began to notice something strange. Despite its conditions, one species dominated the planet completely. Not only survived but thrived. Adapted. Expanded. Humans. The Concord debated for cycles. Some called them anomalies. Some called them engineered. Some called them impossible. Eventually, curiosity outweighed dismissal, and a controlled contact mission was authorized. That was when the girl arrived. Her name, translated into Concord Standard, was short and simple. Lena. She was not a diplomat. Not a soldier in armor. Not a symbolic leader. She was a young human selected from a mid-sized settlement located in a temperate continental region. The selection criteria baffled the Concord observers. She was chosen for resilience, adaptability, and what humans called problem-solving under stress. The delegation expected confusion. Fear. Possibly aggression. They did not expect calm. Lena stood in the observation chamber aboard the Concord vessel with her hands loosely at her sides. Around her, towering alien forms shifted in discomfort. Some species required environmental suits to survive even inside controlled habitats. Others emitted faint bioluminescent pulses that flickered with their emotions. A Concord speaker extended a translation field and addressed her. The galaxy has classified your origin world as a death world. Explain how your kind survives such an environment. Lena tilted her head slightly, studying the towering counselors. She did not seem intimidated. Her voice was steady. We grew there. We learned it. That answer caused immediate reaction across the chamber. Several species emitted sharp bursts of sound indicating disbelief. Others shifted closer to interpret micro-expressions. The speaker continued. Survival is not explanation. Your world contains atmospheric toxicity variations, predator dominance ecosystems, and seismic instability beyond acceptable thresholds for sentient life development. Lena blinked once. It sounds like you are saying it is hard. The chamber fell silent again. A Concord biologist stepped forward, projecting holographic maps of Earth ecosystems. Images of storms, volcanic eruptions, predator encounters, and microbial contamination floated between them. This is not hard. This is incompatible with stable biological civilization. Lena looked at the images for a long moment. Then she said something that would later be recorded as the first fracture in Concord certainty. We did not have stable conditions. So we became stable instead. The council did not immediately respond. The concept did not translate cleanly into their frameworks. Another delegate asked. How many of your kind died during development as a species? Lena paused. Her expression shifted slightly, not to fear, but calculation. I do not know the number. No one does. But we are still here. That statement carried no pride. No sorrow. Only fact. The Concord began deeper analysis. Over subsequent exchanges, Lena described Earth life in terms that gradually unsettled the observers. Children learned to navigate predator zones before adolescence. Weather patterns were studied not for avoidance but prediction and exploitation. Illness was not a rare disruption but a constant evolutionary pressure. The Concord assumed trauma. They asked if humans lived in fear. Lena answered. If you stay afraid all the time you cannot move forward. So you learn what matters and what does not. One of the younger analysts in the chamber began quietly recalculating survival models. Their systems failed repeatedly. The Concord then introduced a controlled test. A simulated environment was constructed. It replicated a moderate Deathworld ecosystem based on Earth parameters. The intent was simple. Observe how Lena would respond when placed in conditions her species allegedly evolved within. Lena was placed inside without warning. The environment was a dense biome chamber. Heat fluctuated unpredictably. Vegetation emitted chemical deterrents. Small synthetic predators were introduced to test reaction time. Terrain shifted with subtle instability. The Concord observed from above. For the first few moments, Lena did nothing. She assessed. She touched the ground. She observed airflow patterns. She listened. Then she moved. She did not run randomly. She did not panic. She selected a direction based on terrain slope and environmental cues. When a predator analog approached, she did not flee immediately. She used a reflective surface from broken mineral formations to misdirect it. When vegetation released toxins, she adjusted her breathing pattern and avoided exposure zones. The Concord analysts grew silent. One commented. She is treating it as navigable. Another responded. It is not navigable. Yet she continued. Hours passed. Lena constructed basic tools from available materials. Not because she had explicit instructions, but because she adapted constraints into solutions. She elevated herself above ground hazards. She redirected environmental traps. She even modified the simulation terrain in minor ways to create safer pathways. At the end of the test cycle, she was extracted without incident. When asked for her evaluation, she simply said, "It was not the worst place I have been." That statement caused immediate controversy among the Concord observers. The implication was unacceptable. If a being from a so-called Deathworld considered a simulated version of such conditions tolerable, then the classification system itself was flawed. The council demanded clarification. Lena was asked. What is worse than a Deathworld environment? She considered carefully. Sometimes people. The chamber went still again. For the first time, the Concord began to understand that their definition of Deathworlds had been incomplete. They had measured environmental hostility. They had not measured adaptive will. Further studies were conducted across multiple human subjects. Not all were like Lena, but all shared patterns that contradicted established biological expectations. Humans did not merely endure hostile environments. They integrated them into behavior, culture, and identity. They built cities in flood zones. They cultivated food in toxic soil through iterative selection. They crossed oceans knowing storms could erase them. They lived with constant risk as a baseline condition rather than an anomaly. The Concord began revising classification systems. But not all agreed. A faction argued that humans were unstable and dangerous precisely because of their adaptation. If they could normalize survival in Deathworld conditions, then they might misinterpret other civilizations as weak or expendable. The debate escalated. Lena, still present as an observer, was asked to respond. Do you think humans are dangerous? She thought for a moment. We can be. So can everyone. That answer did not satisfy the faction. But it unsettled them further because it lacked denial. The Concord attempted final assessment. They presented Lena with a choice. Return to Earth under observation or remain among the Concord as a representative of her species. She looked at the vast chamber of alien delegates. Then she said, "Earth is not something you leave behind. It is something you carry." When asked what that meant, she added, "It means you do not stop being what made you." That statement concluded the formal evaluation. However, the impact of Lena's presence extended far beyond the chamber. Across the Concord, new research divisions formed. Old assumptions were dismantled. Deathworld classification was rewritten into a spectrum of adaptive potential rather than environmental hostility. Humans were no longer listed as anomalies. They were listed as proof of concept. Yet uncertainty remained. Because if one species could thrive under conditions once deemed impossible, what else had been underestimated across the galaxy? And more importantly, what would happen when humanity realized that the rest of the galaxy had never truly been a challenge at all? Lena returned to Earth eventually, not as a prisoner or ambassador, but as a bridge between two ways of understanding life. The Concord continued to watch Earth carefully. Not out of dismissal anymore, but out of caution. Because they had learned something irreversible. A death world was not defined by how harsh it was. It was defined by what it produced. And Earth had produced humans.